about the Muslim Collective's aims and objectives, the kind of work they do, and their collaborations with interfaith organisations. So we're most interested to and eager to hear all about that. Iqbal is also a digital artist, a creative person, a filmmaker, and a proponent and practitioner of community and participatory arts. And Iqbal teaches screen practice and production at Macquarie Uni in Sydney. And so we're delighted that his presentation, as Dick mentioned, this afternoon will also include a short contemplative film made by Iqbal. It's entitled Light in Stones, and it was recently screened at the Interfaith Day of Peace event at Pitt Street Uniting Church in Sydney. So we're looking forward to viewing that. I'm sure we'll all find Iqbal's presentation most interesting and most inspiring, and I'm sure folk will also have some questions and further comments after hearing your inspiring presentation. Thank you, Iqbal. Shall I hand over to Iqbal now, Dick?
Yes, yes.
Dick.
Thank you.
All yours, Dick.
Thank you, Dick, and thank you, Julie. Thanks for the invite. Really appreciate it. Assalamu alaikum, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Peace and blessing be upon you. I invoke the name of the most merciful, the most compassionate. I would also like to acknowledge that we gather today on unceded indigenous land. I acknowledge indigenous elders and the care they have showered on country for millennia. I support their struggles for justice and recognition. I acknowledge the history and unbroken connection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and nations to this country. I acknowledge that for real change to happen, this must now be enabled through an Indigenous voice to Parliament enshrined in the Australian Constitution and a Marakata Commission to supervise a process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. We commit to working together with First Nations. We are strengthened by our relationship for action to organize for the common good. I support the Uluru Statement from the Heart. I have adapted this acknowledgement of country drawn from the Uluru Statement from the Heart and also from the one provided by the Sydney Alliance. As Julie mentioned, I'm a digital artist, a filmmaker. I make community works. And one of my projects was Terrorist Apostate, which was a hybrid theater and digital media work that explores the outsider and Islam and was performed at the Parramatta Riverside Theatres and the Blacktown Arts Centre in Western Sydney here in Australia. I work a lot at the moment with dance, with Indian dances. My most recent project is called Idam, which is an invocation of place inspired by ancient Tamil poetry. My film, if you are interested, can be seen on SBS On Demand. It's an observational film about a school in Western Sydney called This Is Our School. So it's a long film, 100 minutes. So if you're interested, please watch it. I was born in Singapore, where I was a theater maker for many years. Once my theater company was disbanded, I moved to Australia. And as Julie mentioned, I also teach screen practice and production. And I'm the co-president of the Muslim Collective. The Muslim Collective, as some of you may know, it's an Australian faith-based community for progressive thought and social action. We are a diverse and inclusive group that supports and encourages dialogue about the issues, the contemporary issues that we face today in Australia. We envisage a society where all people, regardless of gender, religion, race, culture, or sexuality, can contribute to this conversation. In this regard, we have supported interfaith dialogue, marriage equality, and action on climate. We write reports, we agitate and advocate for social change, we march with Indigenous people, and we intend to work to enshrine the Indigenous voice to Parliament. We believe that Islam is a progressive faith. We feel that Islam broke early ground on women's rights, worker rights, animal rights, environmentalism, and interethnic relationships. However, Islam and Muslims have struggled with the advent of colonialism and capitalism in all Muslim majority countries in the 19th and 20th centuries. Muslims have also found it difficult to adapt to the frenetic challenges of the 21st century, and fundamentalism has emerged as a maladaptive response to modernity. The war on terror saw the dramatic adaptation of religion to a political ideology that demanded exclusivity and dogmatism. Fundamentalism opposes the traditional progressive values of Islam. It looks to the past for a place to return. For fundamentalists, tradition is valued as the literal embodiment of a prehistoric ideal that is under existential threat from excesses of modernity. We as Muslim Collective, we also value the past, but not for it to be exclusive, but for knowledge and inspiration to march some of the ideals that we believe belong to Islam forward. We embrace the past for the future, I would say. We want to bring together Muslims and friends who share progressive values and are committed to improving society by engaging in issues on human rights, social justice, and the environment. In this regard, we work with a number of other faith organizations such as Pitt Street Uniting Church, the Sydney Alliance, which include a number of Jewish organizations, and Hindus for Human Rights. We believe that people of faith have much to contribute to the challenges that we face today. We hope to engender closeness between our faith communities and also raise our collective consciousness to such crisis. We believe that the struggle is going to be long, protracted ride requiring sacrifices. And as people of faith, we can intervene in this debate as we understand the call of sacrifice. With the Pitt Street Uniting Church and Hindus for Human Rights, we have organized a number of interfaith iftars. As Julie mentioned, the latest event we organized was to celebrate the International Day of Peace. And we are hoping to apply for funding for a number of other events. For example, we want to organize a meditation festival that looks at meditation practices across all our different faiths. We strive for critical reflection and growth in our personal spiritual journeys and within our communities. So we are dedicated to creating a space for Muslims who want to talk openly and honestly about their Islam, their beliefs, questions, without fear of exclusion or judgment. I think this is probably the most important thing I feel that we do. In our membership, we have Muslims, ex-Muslims, practicing, non-practicing Muslims, cultural Muslims, gay and lesbian Muslims, straight Muslims, anyone who identifies with the epithet Muslim. In this regard, we hold discussion circles for our membership, we hold events for our membership, and we open these events and discussions to the larger Australian community. This is interesting. It creates a number of interesting conundrums, for example, because we do have practicing and non-practicing Muslims within the same space. So, for example, in our events, we offer a space for prayer, but we don't make it compulsory that people go and pray or put pressure on anybody. So some people go and some people don't. And I think in a way that is our strength, and that's wonderful to see. So like at our interfaith events, for example, like at the Interfaith Iftar, the Uniting Church provided us with a space for Muslim prayer, as well as some of our Muslim members joined the Uniting Church in their prayers, in their meditation, while a number of Muslims were praying. So I think that's quite special to see. The Muslim Collective is about a decade old. As Dick has mentioned, we started off as Muslim for Progressive Values. And this is after a powerful and influential US-based organization of the same name started by Annie Zonneveld, Malaysian-American woman. They have their own issues in the US. They are a powerful, dynamic group. But by 2017, I think we wanted to have our own identity, and we set about changing our name to Muslim Collective. The organization was started by a well-known Melbourne Syrian Australian activist, Reem Swade. Yeah, she was the president for 5 years. You all probably know her really well. She's an engaged activist. She has a huge media profile. She was engaged in many campaigns that was organized by the Muslim Collective. And one of the most important campaigns that she organized was something called Ways sorry about that, was something called Ways to be Muslim, which was a campaign to celebrate Muslim diversity within Australia and around the world. Yeah, diversity around the world. Maybe I could just share my screen and I could show you a quick slide of what's on our website about the Ways to be Muslim campaign. Yeah, so as you can see, it was a photographic, videographic campaign. It went to a number of libraries and spaces, mostly in Victoria. So this was part of the campaign that Reem was involved in. So it was, they were very, very active. And this created a number of issues and most particularly burnout by the membership within Melbourne. It was a small organization run by volunteers. And because of the number of activities they were involved in, COVID hit them really hard. We had a number of members in Sydney, and what we decided to do was to take over the leadership in agreement with the Victorian Committee that we would take over the membership for a number of years, and we see how that progresses. This is the same issues, I think, with many volunteer-run organizations. Burnout is a very important issue. I personally became involved with the Muslim Collective in 2017 when I was looking for a partner organization for my work, Terrorist Apostate. I will speak a little about this work as I think it represents some of the conflicts and issues within our society. Maybe what I'll do is that I'll share my screen again and show just maybe a few second, maybe a 30-second excerpt of the work itself. Let me just do that.
Mom, can you tell me the story about when God created Adam? You want to hear the story again? How many times have I told the story? 10? 100? Maybe 1,000 times. Alhamdulillah. God created the whole universe, but he was not recognized in it. And God said, I was a hidden treasure, and I love to be known. Mom, why was God hidden? God was hidden because he created the whole universe, but he could not see himself in it. God was hidden from himself.
So the work explores the intergenerational conflict within a Muslim Australian family as the son begins to problematize his relationship with his Islamic faith. At the same time, the work also investigates the growing Islamophobia that he faces in his dealings with the Anglo-Australians in his community. Terrorist Apostate is written and directed by myself in collaboration with the Lebanese Australian actor Fadi Alameddin, who he plays all the characters in the work. It is Alameddin's personal story that inspired the work and which offers the opportunity to explore the repercussions that leaving the faith have on a Muslim's individual sense of their own identity as they begin to problematize their relationship to their faith. It deals with the effect this problematization has on the individual's relationship with family and friends within the Islamic community and the larger community, which we call the Ummah, the community of believers. What intensifies this personal narrative is that it unfolds within the context of increasing Islamophobia. Behind the project is a very human story. I wanted to place this story, basically an Oedipal, all-too-human story of a son's rebellion, into a contemporary context in which Muslims are seen as other, where Islam is seen as incompatible with Western values. For me, Fadi's journey inspired me to have my own conversation around Islam. I did not want to vilify or apologize for Islam in the work or even explain it. I had seen, before I started working on the work, I had seen Ayat Akhtar's Disgraced, a Pulitzer Prize winning play about an ex-Muslim New York lawyer. And in my view, that work was really nihilistic. It is lost in its own hopelessness, seeing nothing of value in Islam or Muslim societies. I think as an artist is important to me. I think a true work of art demands that we shake our sensibilities, refusing simple answers that the world is throwing at us. In starting the project Terrorist Apostate, I was literally forced to rethink what my Islam meant. I had to wake up from my own private comforting musings of Islamic poetry, the eternal stanzas of Hafiz and Rumi. If anything, creating this work has strengthened my commitment both to social justice and to the Islamic faith. There are many resources within the history of Islam to show that pluralism, egalitarianism, popular sovereignty are all Islamic values. The Prophet, peace be upon him, revolutionary move was a demand for economic and social justice. Women and children were given entitlements and freedoms that were previously unheard of. Many Muslims were familiar with the famous quote by an important Islamic scholar called Muhammad Abduh. He was an Egyptian scholar, religious reformer, and anti-colonial warrior who returned from his travels to Europe at the turn of the last century and said, I went to the West and, this was the 19th century. I went to the West and I saw Islam, but no Muslims. I got back to the East and saw Muslims, but not Islam. I had always, I think, mistakenly thought of this statement as racist, a kind of Westoxification that saw good in the West and only problems and evil in the East. But for Abduh, it is incumbent upon every Muslim to live their Islam and to fight colonial and by extension, any other oppression. It has now dawned on me that what I think he meant was that in the West, people lived without colonial oppression and thus were able to be Muslims. And in the East, because of colonial oppression, Islam cannot exist. Another interesting aspect of Abdullah's quote is that it thinks of Islam as universal, belonging to the entirety of humanity. Personally, I find this quite attractive. Any attempt to assert Islam's exceptionalism, I think, is a dead end. I'm aware that all this is a reading, my own reading, but I take my cue from the Quran itself, because to read is the first imperative in the Quran. The first words of the Quran is Iqra, read. All readings are contested readings, but it is vital that we read our histories, including our sacred histories, with the intention of extending our species being, going beyond our limited finitude and individuality to a universal collective consciousness. Reading is thus a practice, a field practice, and making a work of art is a process of reading. I think the great Sufi poets understood this best of all. For them, writing and living their verse was an act of witnessing and testifying to their Islam. The late, great Harvard-based scholar Shahab Ahmad pointed out that in Rumi's Masnavi, which is Rumi's masterwork, contained over 4,500 direct citations of Quranic verses. Rumi's reading enabled him to advance an Islamic theology, a radical theology premised on love. Discussions on Islam and Muslims tend to be framed in stereotypes. I think the West has generally been disinterested in Islam, and probably this attitude goes way back to the Enlightenment, where Islam and Muslims were viewed in many ways as backward, providing a foil to European rationality, as if the Enlightenment itself would have been possible without the advancements that Muslims brought to human knowledge. On the other hand, there has also been an interest and study into Islam and Muslims, particularly since the Enlightenment. However, much of this study has been twisted to advance a virulent form of racism. I think you can just go to YouTube today and listen to the worst anti-Islam ideologues. I think for many of them can quote the Quran and the Hadith, the sayings of the prophet, better than most Muslims. For these people, Islam is an ideology which exists without social formations, without a culture. Salman Saeed, the critical theorist, asks in his book, "What is Islam in a world dominated by Western enterprise but a scandal?" he asks. The kind of Islamophobia that Muslims face on a daily basis, especially that Muslim women face, is a scandal. We live at a time where it seems okay for someone like Fraser Anning, an Australian senator, to stand up in parliament. Thankfully, he's no longer there, without any basis that the majority of Muslims in Australia live on welfare and that they are, and I quote him, the least able to assimilate and integrate. When Anning called for a final solution to Muslim immigration by putting it to a referendum, what is truly chilling, and most commentators have ignored, is that how many people agreed with him. What I believe Muslims are facing around the world, and this include the horrific massacres of the Rohingya, the mass incarceration of the Uyghurs, actually extends beyond racism itself and reveal the very cracks and fissures of our world. This is another reason that I find Said's use of the word scandal in relation to Muslims facing racism in a world dominated by Western enterprise so appropriate, because a scandal is often a false moral outrage, masking the real issues faced by society. And we know these issues are many, including the internal and external limits to capitalist expansion, environmental degradation, the demand for justice by people all around the world, and the need to rethink the equation of labor and profit and the value of human and non-human beings. In saying this, I'm not in any way minimizing the importance of racism. Rather, I'm emphasizing that racist sensationalization is used as a scandal to distract from these other issues. We cannot separate these issues from racism, they're enmeshed. But racism in its own configuration, and once it is unleashed, travels its own destructive path. The challenge is on us, artists, activists, to remind ourselves, to remind people of the source of the inferno. It is no longer sufficient to simply call it out. One of the main issues that the Muslim collective deals with is a fight against the legalist interpretation of Islam. As an artist, personally, this resonates with me, as I've always had an uncomfortable relationship with the law. I find legalist expressions of Islam limited and limiting. The history of Islam is a contentious dialogue with law around what is the law, its sources, limits, and expression, how the law is practiced. The law was also historically pitted against other aspects of Islam, for examples, against theology and ethics. However, today, we see the equation of Islam and law pushed by both Muslims and non-Muslims. Suddenly, we hear the word Sharia everywhere. Interestingly, what unites many Western commentators with Islamists is their shared vision of Islam as a unified, unchanging juridical system. To both of them, Islam is the severe authoritarian version of the Sharia. And we know, for example, Graham Wood, in his article that catapulted him to fame, which is called What ISIS Really Wants, assert that ISIS is truly Islamic. In the article, Wood quotes the Princeton scholar Bernard Haikal, who asserts that Muslims and non-Muslims who maintain that ISIS is un-Islamic are, and I quote him, embarrassed and politically correct with a cotton candy view of their own religion, close quote, that neglects, quote again, what their religion has historically and legally required, close quote. Wood goes on to write, and I quote him again, the reality is that the Islamic State is Islamic, very Islamic. The religion preached by ISIS, most ardent followers derives from coherent and even learned interpretations of Islam. It is this view, I think, which is shared by many people, many politicians, even well-meaning ones in the West. I find this to be a curious contemporary phenomenon. I don't think that many young Muslims today identify with a legalist view of the world. I saw a documentary a few years ago about a group of young men in the UK who went to join ISIS and who now have returned to the UK. A number of them are in prison and they were interviewed. And quite a few of them said that they went because they were disconnected from their parents and the world of their parents. I think this is an important issue, and it will continue to be an important issue here in Australia. There's important work being done in Islamic exegesis by feminists, humanitarians, the LGBTIQ community, and religious scholars. One of my favorite is Fatima Mernissi, the late Moroccan feminist sociologist and Islamic scholar. All her books, for example, The Veil and the Male Elite, Islam and Democracy, like many great works of feminism, combine fine scholarship and personal urgency. This is becoming really relevant again with the issues that we find now happening in Iran. Being an artist myself, I'm particularly interested in the work of other artists, including the Egyptian writer Nawal El-Saadawi and the Pakistani UK-based writer Tariq Ali. They are very similar in many ways. Both are activists, daring, politically engaged, and stern critics of both the West and Muslims. But best of all, their writings truly sing and address the heart. When I first got to Australia, I was lucky enough to see a production of Nawal El-Saadawi, Woman at Point Zero. And I think it is one of the loudest shouts against women oppression ever. Tariq Ali wrote a very series of 5 books called the Islam Quintet. He wrote it over a period of 20 years. There are 5 historical novels, for example, in response to a comment he heard during the Gulf War saying that Muslims had no culture. He wrote these books to give a different perspective on world history and to remind the world of the Islamic contributions to culture. Each book is set in a different period of Islamic history. I think many Muslims would also be interested in probably reading these books. I know many of my Muslim friends have not read these books. The books are fun. They are teeming with rebels, lovers, intrigues, conflicts, and really interesting facts. Who knew that there was an Islamic Sultanate in China that attempted to unify the Chinese people against the Qing, against the Manchu? These works also express a strong sense of conviviality that Islamic societies are historically famous for. I believe it is that these values that Muslims today need to be arguing for. Within the faith, we have people making decisions about who is a Muslim and who is not. In effect, I think they are playing God. Personally, I really detest any attempt to confine people and to set borders. Islam is truly diverse and plural. In fact, many scholars, when they study Muslim communities, including Western scholars, Clifford Geertz, very famous one, have trouble deciding even what Islam is, arguing that when we refer to Islam, we need to remember that it has always been a plurality of Islams. So thank you very much. I will finish my talk here. Maybe we can discuss further. I'm going to now share my screen and hopefully there will be no latency issues when I'm showing the film. If there is, I'll share the link and maybe you can watch it at your own time. It is a very short film. I'll just contextualize it a little bit. I shot it in India, where there are very protracted problems now around Islamophobia, Islamic racism. massive issues around that. And I made it also as a way to signify what is powerful in faith. I made it as a tribute to one of India's greatest poets, Rabindranath Tagore, who was about bringing people together, bringing diverse faiths together. So it's a meditative film. It's very short. It's about 6.5 minutes. I'll just put it on and then we'll share my screen. Just apologies. I'm having some internet issues, but I think it's going to be okay in a sec. Just trying to restart my player again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Iqbal. This is now an opportunity for Q&A and discussion. What we try to do, Iqbal, is to invite people to use the chat facility to briefly make a statement or ask a question. And Julie and I will try and coordinate that so that everybody gets a chance to ask a question of you, or in some cases just make a point and you may wish to respond. You may wish to respond to that.
Sure.
Who wants to go first? Must be someone out there. Margie Mitchikis. Unmute yourself, Margaret. Unmute yourself, Maggie.
Yes, I've done that. Yes, I'm not very au fait with all this. I just want to say that last film was absolutely beautiful. And the poem too, really was very atmospheric in many ways and moving. My question really is human nature being what it is and people wanting to be recognised and remembered and noted and being appreciated. How do we encourage people to understand that rational thought is so emotionally based and affected by our fears as well as by our hopes? Is it just a different sort of education we need?
I think that's a question for all of us. I think it's a question that we have to struggle with on a daily basis. And I think that question can only, and I honestly believe this, not to get out of it, but I think that question is like a collective question. It's for all of us to answer together. And I think we cannot answer it through, I don't believe just through education. I don't believe in a simple answer to that question. I believe in collective action. And I think that's the only way that we address some of these issues, because the issues, I think you are right, Margaret, you pointed to these issues are also within ourselves. And I think it's not only, we have to work outwards, but we also have to work inwards, isn't it? To resist the kind of values, the kind of morality that we can adapt as well from the world that we see. So I think it's a kind of two-way relationship between us and the world. But I think the best way, like one of the reasons why I joined Muslim Collective was I felt isolated. I felt that within Australia, there were not many people who were thinking around the issues of progressive Islam. And so, I think the best way is not to feel isolated, is actually join up with that's like your group here, which is an incredible, important group. And I think we need to also be aware that we are a minority, but that doesn't mean that because we are a minority, that we have no force, that we have no power. And I think that's also illegitimate. It's not correct. I think just because we are a minority, it does not mean that we do not have a voice. I think it's very important to stand together, like what we are doing in Sydney, working together with a few important organizations. There is a very significant issue that's happening within the South Asian community in Australia, because we have a lot of Islamic racism, which is happening in India. And that is being transferred into the streets in Australia, especially on the streets of Sydney. So it's part of a campaign that we are engaged in to counter that. So in a way, no matter what happens in India, in a way, we need to protect our Australian communities as well. Not that we don't work towards India, but I think, we need to begin by looking outside our windows first. So To answer your question, I think it's a collective endeavor. I think that's the simplest and the easiest, but not that I'm saying that is an easy endeavor. It's not. It's a difficult one, but I think it's something that we have to do together because we are a minority.
Does that imply really that groups like ours could be doing more active things together with the Islamic community, perhaps as well? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for your insights.
Iqbal, let me ask a question that comes from your film. One part of the graphic that I didn't quite understand was that the journey is treachery.
Yeah.
Expand on that a little bit as to what you were hinting at there.
I mean, I was putting myself in the position of a pilgrim, and I think when we take up any pilgrimage, it's always a difficult, treacherous journey where all the stumbling blocks to that journey will be there. So that's exactly what I mean. I think it's in a simple way, it is the journey of the pilgrim is always a treacherous one. It's not an easy one.
It's certainly the case if you're breaking unfamiliar ground.
Yeah.
And particularly if you're getting pushback from those around you.
Yeah, I think because I think the journey is also treacherous in a personal sort of ways, and because when we undertake the journey of pilgrimage, is also to question ourselves, right? Whereby we have to throw away all our certainties and adopt the uncertainties of the world, of what we understand, and I think that's the richness of pilgrimage.
Another question or comment? There's one here somewhere. Rod Peppier.
Thanks, Dick, and thank you, Iqbal. If I'm just sort of trying to formulate a question coming out of what I think you were saying, but you were talking about intergenerational challenges, if I understand you, for progressive Muslims in Australia, and I'm sure around the world. I recognise that generalisations are a problem, and I don't want to make one. But I'm wondering about the nature of those types of challenges. Are they are they religious challenges or something other? I'm not sure if I've asked that question very clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sorry. Go.
Yeah, no, I think Rod, I think I know what you are getting at, because it's dangerous to make generalizations, obviously, but I think there is a phenomenon that I am witnessing in the Muslim community, as I mentioned about the documentary that I saw, where these people who are alienated from their families are doing things, for example, to try to understand themselves and their identity, their worth in the world. And I don't think the easy answers that a kind of the parents' tradition is providing, which is just, these are the rules and you follow the rules. I don't think that's a convincing answer to young people. I'm a lecturer at a university, and the amount of flexibility that we give to our students, for example, I think that's really important, because we understand young people are resistant to that. And so I think that the way I was brought up in a very conservative Muslim home, and that actually led me to question it, to say, really, this, as an artist, I was becoming an artist, a young person, and what my parents were trying to teach me at the time, I don't think was valuable for me in any way, because it was about following certain rigid boundaries and rules. So I feel that there is an issue, because the kind of Islam that has, that many Muslims, Sunni Muslims in particular, I'm speaking about Sunni Muslims. I'm a Sunni Muslim, so I identify this with Sunni Islam. And I think that that kind of Islam, which is an Islam of legalism, a juridical Islam, an Islam that, if you like, for example, there is a word that we use a lot in among the Muslim called Salafi Islam. Salafi is it means going back to the Islam of the forefathers. Yeah. When really, what is that Islam, for example? To understand that is actually not so simple, it's not contentious. I personally think that is more attractive to young people, to understand that there are no easy answers and we work together, to address the issues. These are important traditions that we have of the past. I'm not denying these traditions are valuable to us, but how do we hold them to them today? And I do not think that the kind of the rigid Islam that is practiced by the majority of Muslims is satisfying for young people.
Thank you. I would echo that for my own faith tradition as well. Yeah, although I guess sometimes there are those within our traditions that would say, the younger people are much less conservative than older people. That's the danger of generalizations. I live and work within an elderly church community here, and they are very open. Yes. Certainly in theology, not always in practice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heavily identify with what you're saying, and I thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to be ageist or anything. I think ageism has no place in our conversations or in our society. Mm-hmm. But yeah, but at the same time, I think that we need to look at our youth as hope, as a potential for the future, and in a sense, take their problems, their issues seriously.
Yes.
Yeah, and not to say, okay, this is the plaster that we have from the past, and we're going to apply it as a band-aid on your forehead as well. Yeah. Yeah. I think it is a complex issue, Rod. I think there, and sometimes the danger is because young people are looking for answers, for certainties in their lives. We also do not want to reify the kind of values that have not worked, which I think, they can adapt as well, because that is also quite tantalizing, about adapting those kind of reified values. And we also, I think, need to be conscious of that, and hopefully, to challenge both all generations, including the older generation.
Sigrid, unmute yourself, please.
Unmute?
Unmute yourself, Sigrid.
I just wanted to say in response to that as well. Sorry, I'm from the Muslim Collective. Hello, everybody. That's something that we talk about as well within the Muslim Collective, is that, Iqbal made lots of references to this idea of the past and this kind of tradition that the popular view seems to be that we should go back to, or that we should protect. But I think one of the things that we talk about and explore a lot is that the past also were lots of moments in time, not this one thing. And that if we do look at the past, that in terms of, well, if I speak in terms of the expression of Islam at any rate, that it wasn't one thing. There wasn't one pure thing that existed in some moment in time. It was this incredibly diverse, inclusive, quite dynamic response to where it was being practiced in the world. So I think for me, that has been one of the most valuable things that I've gained as a Muslim, to understand that to have that knowledge has been a very powerful thing. And I think that if we can also start to bring whatever faith tradition that we're in, if we can start to bring these learnings and these knowledges into the present as well, to show how dynamic actually these faiths have been, is very valuable for passing on knowledge to young people.
Yeah. I mean, thanks for that. Thanks for that. But it's like in Islam, we have a rich tradition of poetry, for example, and throughout the entire history of Muslim history, this was part of the school curriculum to study the great poets of Hafiz and Rumi, for example, which are critical to our standing of what Islam is. But unfortunately, today, for example, Muslims are questioning whether these poets are even Muslims. And I think that is really unfortunate with what's happening within Orthodox Islam today. Yeah.
Could you elaborate, Iqbal, on what underlies that questioning? What's causing consternation about them?
I think because there is a view that a simple or simplistic view, perhaps, that there is a codification. I mean, I'm not ashamed to say that the Quran, it's a very contradictory document. I think that it is beauty, that it is power. And I think for many Muslims, that is something that they refuse to accept. They would probably, accuse me of being a non-Muslim for saying that, But I think that is the richness of Islamic history. That is the richness of the Quran. So in a way, I think, like, there are many verses that has been interpreted in many different ways, because these are words, and we human beings read words and interpret them in different ways. And Muslims throughout the history of Islam has done that. But then we also have versions of very orthodox Islam starting from the 17th, 18th centuries in places like, you may all have heard of like Wahhabism, the kind of Islam that says that there is one true way of practicing. There's one true way of praying, or one true way of fasting, or one true way of doing something, And what happens is that has also come to us with a lot of economic benefit across Muslim societies, because it has come with petrodollars. It has an ideology that has been permeated into the Muslim world through training of imams in the Middle East, particularly in Saudi Arabia. And they have come back, I think, with a form of Islam that is not recognized in many of these communities, but these communities have been forced to accept because of the economic power that is behind these ideologies as well. Yeah, so I think that is dangerous. For example, to Wahhabi, a Sufi is an apostate. A Sufi is not part of the Islamic tradition. And I think how sad if we lose this poetic tradition in Islam. Yeah.
I think that Christians listening would hear would echo some of your comments about scripture, our Bible, which has been variously interpreted, texts taken out of context, and there are arguably contradictions. And we need to grapple with that. And so I'm sure that what you're saying, it will not be, something that we're not familiar with in the Christian tradition. Indeed, we share that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we share it across multiple traditions which hold on to ancient texts. And I think that's imperative on all of us to reread these texts. Yeah. One of my favorite verses is the first verse that was revealed in the Quran, the verse that the word to read comes from. It says that, I have created you from something that clings. And to me, as a person living today in the world, many Muslims in the past have interpreted the verse, something that clings, is like either it is it's semen or it is the embryo, you know, their mind have moved there. But I think God is saying we cling to him. There is a clinginess, that there is something that attaches us, that we have Godness in all of us. It's something that connects us with God. And that is one of the few verses that's revealed in the Quran, that we are connected very closely with one another. That is, the divine is in us. But it's really interesting. I mean, personally, I don't accept the interpretation that this means embryo or something like that, you know. Is the embryo that clings to the ovum or whatever it is. I don't accept that. I think that that verse is far more spiritual, far more enriching. Yeah. And I think the beauty is, I think, you know, like, we do not have a church in Islam. There is no church. I mean, you know, I think that is a potential and also a danger within Islam, that Islamic authority is derived through anyone who wants to say that they are a Muslim, really, because, you know, there is no authorized body that can speak on behalf of Muslims, really. And that's the danger. That's the danger with something is also powerful, is enriching. There's a potential in that, but it's also dangerous because a group like ISIS can say they represent Muslims as well. Yeah.
Another comment or another question, please? Iqbal, I think you've given us, Margie?
Yes, I know I've asked a question before, but in our society, it seems to me, or all societies really, people want to cling to the powerful, not to perhaps the inner voice that keeps speaking to them about all sorts of things in life. And there's a lot of literature, particularly modern literature, which encourages people to seek the savior, you know, the person, the hero type person, from comic book heroes to literary heroes, detectives, or whoever they may be, or murder solvers, or whatever. There's always heroes that we're expected to know about and learn about, and how they operate, and we too can be our own heroes and everything. And I think you were referring to that clinginess of the connection between ourselves and each other, is just, we're all connected in such a way that that's what we should be emphasizing. And I think poetry, really beautiful poetry, shows us that.
Yes.
And encourages us to listen to ourselves and listen to each other, and the commonality of human person, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe even of nature.
Yeah.
We're connected to it so much. We don't always appreciate it.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have more poetry at school.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for that comment, Margaret. I completely, I think, I agree with that wholeheartedly. Not only to have poetry in school, but also about, I think, you know, one of the things that part of all religious traditions, I don't think there's a single religious tradition that does not have this. In this world, I think we recognize two things: power and money, right? And I think all religious faiths says, no, that's not the only two things in the world. There's also something else far more important than money and power. And I think that is why I think religion still has a part in the conversation, because all the world tells us there's only two things. And we are saying, no, that's not true. We refuse, we take exception to that the world is only money and power.
It's a hard battle to fight.
Yeah. But I think we have the resources. You know, there's a scholar whom I really appreciate very much. His name is Kojin Karitani, a Japanese scholar. And he says it's very important for us to bring back religion into, he's not a religious scholar by any means. He's actually a philosopher, a Kantian philosopher. And he says very important for us to bring back religion into the conversation today, because religion provides the ultimate example of the gift economy, exchange without nothing in return. And he
That's
says,
good.
yeah, religion provides that model. Nothing else does, according to him. Yeah. And I mean, religion in all its forms, indigenous religions, you know, all its forms has that as the center, the gift. Yeah, something for nothing. I think as Christians, you guys know that really better than anybody else. I honestly believe that. Something for nothing.
Though I do think there are people, of course, people that I know who are not religious at all,
Yeah.
and don't accept belief in God or anything. Certainly have a lot of criticism of religions, full stop.
Yeah.
But their personal philosophies are one of empathy with other people and sharing without return.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, I suspect lots of people who work for organisations like Médicaments Sans Frontières, for example, not necessarily Christian or religious, but they give of their lives as often as not.
Yeah. No, that's why I say not only religious people, but we are an important part of the conversation.
Yes.
I don't think we are the only part. I think that's really an important distinction. I think everybody has a part in this conversation, but to silence religious voices is also problematic, because I think religion also provides us with a model. Like for example, I mean, the climate change debate. Nobody speaks about sacrifice, this kind of sacrifices we need to make in our lives and in our lifestyles for there to be a better future for our children and grandchildren. You know, that is something which is not being spoken. And as people of faith, I think that's something that language of sacrifice is something we are familiar with.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a very individual thing as well.
Yep.
Thank you, Iqbal.
Yeah, thank you. Iqbal, thank you very much for the insights that you've shared with us. I think I found it very, very illuminating and helpful. And I'm also hoping that perhaps this will re-establish the links that we've had with the Muslim collective in the past between the PCNV, and that there will be other occasions for us to interact, and maybe even to the point of being able to do something in a live, in vivo type of meeting. We've got out of the habit of doing that with COVID lockdowns and the ease with which you can use this Zoom technology, which has been a great gift to us, I think. But there's a lot to be said for a face-to-face encounter. You're very generous with your time. We're quite inspired, I think, by your artistic approach and your brief film. It was a highlight of your address for me, and I'm sure